Before we begin, leave a comment telling us which city you are watching from and what time it is there right now. In March 1897, 3 men left the small village of Santo Antônio do Salto in the mountainous interior of Brazil, heading for an abandoned farm known as Sítio da Ponte Velha. They carried tools, kerosene lanterns, and provisions for 2 days. None of them returned. What makes this case disturbing is not just the disappearance itself, but the fact that according to records from the time, they had multiple opportunities to return, and they chose not to. This is not a folkloric tale. There are no ghosts, curses, or legends. What you are about to hear has been reconstructed from letters, sworn statements given to the district sheriff, notes from a local priest, and the personal diary of one of the wives. These are fragments of a real story, silent, human, and inexplicable. Santo Antônio do Salto was a community of just over 200 inhabitants, built around a white chapel and a watermill. The houses were made of wattle and daub, with thatched or colonial tile roofs. The main road, if it could be called that, was a dirt track, muddy during the rains and dusty in the summer. Life revolved around the harvest of corn, beans, and cassava. Families knew each other by name, by voice, by the smell of smoke from their kitchens. The 3 men who disappeared were known to everyone. The first was Sebastião Moreira da Cruz, 32 years old, tall, thin, with a dark beard and deep-set eyes. He worked as a carpenter and was respected for his quietness and competence. He was married to Benedita, with whom he had 2 young children. He didn't drink, gamble, or miss mass. An ordinary man, almost invisible in the village routine. The second was Joaquim Ribeiro, 41 years old, more robust, with sun-tanned skin and calloused hands. He was a blacksmith and farmer. A widower for 3 years, he was raising a 9-year-old daughter named Rosa on his own. Known for being quiet, but with a firm temperament. They said he rarely smiled, but that his word was worth more than any signed document. The third was Antonio das Chagas, the youngest at 26. He was single and a jack of all trades. He did odd jobs on farms, repairs, deliveries. He lived with his widowed mother in a small house near the river. He was seen as a dreamer, restless, always looking at the horizon as if waiting for something different to happen. No one knows for sure who had the idea to go to Sítio da Ponte Velha, but on March 22nd, the 3 were last seen in the village around 5 p.m., walking together along the old road that led to the mountains. Sítio da Ponte Velha was located approximately 8 kilometers from the center of Santo Antônio do Salto. It had been abandoned for almost a decade since the death of its former owner, a lonely man named Luciano Tavares, who had died without any known heirs. The main house, made of brick and wood, was in ruins. The windows had no glass, the roof had collapsed in places. All that remained around it was tall grass, a fallen fence, and the wooden bridge over a dark stream. According to reports, no one went there. Not out of fear, but out of disinterest. There was nothing worth the walk. So why did 3 adult men, with families and responsibilities, decide to go? The answer, recorded in official documents, is practical. They were going to fetch wood and tiles that were still usable from the old house. The community needed materials to renovate the chapel. The priest had given his permission. It was voluntary work, almost an act of faith. But there is one detail that appears only in a side note in the parish book. They were warned of the distance and the approaching nightfall. They chose to go on. They knew they might not return the same day. They took supplies. They took flashlights. They told their families that if necessary, they would sleep there and return the next morning. Benedita, Sebastião's wife, told the priest years later, "He kissed me on the forehead before leaving. He said he would be back before lunch the next day. He didn't seem worried. He seemed determined." What we know for sure is that on the morning of March 23rd, Sebastião, Joaquim, and Antonio did not return. At noon, Benedita sought out the local blacksmith, who said he had not seen Joaquim. Antonio's mother, nervous, went to Benedita's house. The 3 women waited until evening. Nothing. On the 24th, a group of 7 men set out for Sítio da Ponte Velha. They found the tools carefully stacked next to the old house. They found the lanterns still filled with kerosene. They found the food untouched, wrapped in a burlap bag hanging from a branch, presumably to protect it from animals. But they did not find the 3 men, and that's when the real mystery began. Because, according to the testimony of Domingos Ferreira, one of the men in the search party, there was something strange about the scene. Everything was tidy. It didn't look abandoned. It looked like a pause. Sebastião's boots were lined up near the entrance to the house. Their hats, all 3 of them, were hanging on an old nail on the wall, as if they had come in, as if they had settled in, but the house was empty. And in the final pages of the district sheriff's official report, there is a handwritten sentence, almost illegible. No signs of a struggle, no traces beyond the bridge. To understand what happened that March night, we need to go back a few weeks, to the quiet winter that preceded the disappearance. Sebastião Moreira da Cruz woke up every day before sunrise. His routine was methodical. He lit the wood stove, made coffee, woke up his children, kissed Benedita on the forehead, and left for the workshop. He worked alone in a small wooden building behind the house, where the smell of sawdust and peroba oil permeated everything. There he made doors, windows, and benches for the chapel. His work was silent. He measured, cut, sanded. He rarely talked, even when there were customers around. Years later, Benedita would say that Sebastião was a man of few words and many thoughts. She didn't know exactly what he was thinking, but she knew when something was bothering him. He would stop in the middle of a task. He would stare into space. He would take a deep breath. He would go back to work. In the weeks before his disappearance, Benedita noticed that he was more distant. Not angry, not sad, just far away, as if his mind were elsewhere. I asked if everything was okay. He smiled. He said yes, but I knew that wasn't true. Joaquim Ribeiro, the blacksmith, lived an even more solitary life. Since the death of his wife, Mariana, from childbed fever 3 years earlier, he had become a man of strict routine. He woke up at cockcrow, lit the forge, and hammered until nightfall. His daughter, Rosa, spent her days helping neighbors or playing by the river. At night, father and daughter ate in silence. Joaquim did not talk about Mariana. He did not cry. He did not pray aloud. But Rosa would recount many years later, as an adult, in a letter to the regional newspaper, "My father seemed to be waiting for something. I didn't know what, but he would look at the mountains every afternoon before going into the house, as if someone were coming down from there." The week before the disappearance, Joaquim was seen talking at length with Sebastião at the chapel door. No one knows what they said. The only record comes from a man named Zeferino, who was passing by and heard fragments. It's not a question of courage, Joaquim. It's a question of necessity. Necessity for what? Antonio das Chagas, the youngest of the 3, was different. He was not marked by mourning or silence. He was marked by restlessness. His mother, Dona Eulalia, a widow since Antonio was 10, was constantly worried about her son. He couldn't hold down a job for long. He wasn't lazy. He was restless. He would work for 2 weeks on a farm, ask to be dismissed, go to help at the sawmill, then disappear for days, returning saying he had gone fishing. But he didn't bring any fish. Dona Eulalia said that her son lived in a waking dream. He spoke little about how he felt, but he spoke a lot about what he wanted. He wanted to leave the village. He wanted to see the capital. He wanted to see the sea. But he never left. Something kept him there. Or maybe something was calling him. 2 days before his disappearance, Antonio was seen sitting alone by the river in the late afternoon. A woman named Ana Candida, who was washing clothes nearby, told the priest. He was writing something on a piece of paper. When he saw me, he quickly folded it and put it in his pocket. He seemed ashamed or scared. No one knows what was written on that piece of paper. It was never found. The invitation, or proposal, to go to Sítio da Ponte Velha came on a Sunday afternoon after Mass. According to witnesses, it was Sebastião who first mentioned the idea of getting wood and tiles from the abandoned house. The priest approved. He said it would be a good deed, that God would bless the effort. Joaquim, who was present, agreed immediately. "I'll go," he said, just like that. Antonio, who was not at Mass, was sought out by Sebastião hours later. No one heard the conversation, but Donna Eulalia reported that her son came home that night with shining eyes. He said, "I'm going on a trip, Mom, just for 2 days." She asked where. He didn't answer properly. He said something about helping at the chapel. She didn't understand very well, but she didn't insist. On the morning of March 22nd, Antonio left home before dawn. He left a short note on the table. "I'll be back tomorrow. I love you." Donna Eulalia would keep that note until the end of her life. What no one knew, or at least what no one admitted to knowing, was that the three men had something in common besides the village. According to some unconfirmed reports, they were the only men in Santo Antônio do Salto who could read and write fluently. In a community where most people were illiterate, this put them in a unique position. They were sought after to write letters, read documents, and interpret contracts. And there is a curious detail recorded by the priest in his personal notebook. "Sebastião came to see me 3 weeks ago. He asked if I knew the history of Sítio da Ponte Velha. I asked why. He said he had read something. He did not specify what. Read where. The village had no library. There were no regular newspapers. The only books available were those used for mass, a few almanacs, and occasionally correspondence from the capital. But there is an interesting document in the diocese's archives, a letter addressed to Sebastião Moreira da Cruz, dated February 1897. The sender is not identified. The letter is incomplete. Only the last page has been preserved. It reads, "Therefore, if the information is correct, the place mentioned corresponds to the former property of Luciano Tavares. I cannot confirm the veracity of the report, but I believe it is worth checking. Take someone you trust, and be careful what you look for. Sometimes what we find is not what we expected." On the afternoon of March 22nd, the three men were last seen walking along the old road. They were carrying backpacks, tools, and flashlights. The sky was clear. The sun was beginning to set. Donna Benedita saw them leave from her window. Years later, she would say, "They were talking. They didn't seem worried." Sebastião looked back once. He waved. I waved back. That was the last time she saw him. At 6 in the afternoon, a boy named Paulinho, who was tending goats near the mountains, saw the three men passing by on the trail. He shouted a greeting. Sebastião replied. Joaquim waved. Antonio smiled. By 7:30 in the evening, it was already dark, and that's when everything began to fall apart, slowly, silently, like smoke. The trail leading to Sítio da Ponte Velha wound its way up the hillside. It was narrow, uneven, covered with roots and loose stones. During the day, the path was visible, but at night, even with flashlights, it required attention. The brush grew tall on both sides. Ancient trees formed a dark green tunnel. The sound of running water from the stream came from afar, muffled, constant. It is not known exactly what time the three men arrived at the site, but based on the distance and average walking pace, it is estimated that they reached the site around 8 p.m., perhaps a little earlier. What we know for sure is that they arrived. The tools were there, the lanterns were there, and the food was carefully stored, as if they planned to return. But what happened between their arrival and the following dawn remains shrouded in silence. The reconstruction begins here, not with certainties but with clues. When the search party arrived at the site on the morning of March 24th, they found the kerosene lanterns positioned at 3 different points. One on the porch of the old house, with its wick still intact. Another next to the wooden bridge, extinguished. And the third inside the house, in what remained of a room with rotten plank flooring. This suggests that they split up, or that they moved in sequence, leaving the lanterns as markers. The tools, an axe, 2 saws, a hammer, and nails, were carefully stacked next to the outside wall of the house. Not thrown, not abandoned in a hurry, organized. The three men's hats hung on a rusty nail on the porch wall. Sebastião's boots, as mentioned earlier, were lined up near the entrance. Only his. Joaquim and Antonio apparently kept their boots on. Inside the house, on an old dust-covered table, something intriguing was found. A half-burned tallow candle. It was protected from the wind by a broken glass cup turned upside down. Someone had lit that candle. Someone had taken care to protect it. And around the table on the dusty floor there were marks. Not clear footprints, but scratches, scrapes, as if something heavy had been dragged, or as if someone had moved in a strange, irregular way. The most detailed account of the state of the house came from a man named Juan Custodio, who was part of the search party. He was known for his accurate memory and was the one who later gave a formal statement to the police chief. According to Juan Custodio, the house didn't look abandoned that night. It looked inhabited, not by living people, but by people who had just left. There was a strange smell in the air. It wasn't mold, it wasn't rot, it was turned earth, like after rain, but it hadn't rained. He continues, "We entered slowly, me and 2 others. The others stayed outside. The candle was lit. The flame flickered when we opened the door, but it didn't go out. I looked at the table. There was dust everywhere, except where the candle was, as if someone had wiped that spot with their hand." Juan paused before adding, "And there was something written in the dust. It wasn't a complete word, it was letters or numbers. I couldn't read it properly, but it looked like it was written in a hurry." The police chief asked if he could reproduce what he saw. Juan said he tried, but the light was dim and he wasn't sure. He drew something that looked like the letters V and L, or maybe U and I. There was no consensus. When the deputy returned to the scene days later, the table was clean. The wind had possibly erased any marks. But the most disturbing detail of the scene was not inside the house. It was beyond it. The old bridge, which gave the farm its name, crossed a shallow, dark stream surrounded by mossy rocks and dense vegetation. The bridge was wooden, narrow, with loose planks and no railing. It was unsafe. It hadn't been used in years, but someone had crossed it. Boot prints, fresh, still visible in the mud on the opposite bank, indicated that at least 2 people had crossed the bridge. The footprints continued for about 20 meters into the woods, and then disappeared. They didn't fade gradually. They weren't erased by the terrain. They simply stopped, as if whoever left them had turned back or had been carried away. Juan Custodio and the other men followed the trail to where it ended. There, they found something no one expected. A small pile of stones, 5 or 6 stones carefully stacked, forming a kind of landmark. It wasn't natural. It was deliberate. And next to the stones, stuck in the ground, was a green stick, still alive with leaves, as if it had been torn from a nearby tree and stuck there on purpose. No one understood the meaning, but everyone felt that it was a message. The search party shouted the names of the 3 men, Sebastião, Joaquim, Antonio. Their voices echoed through the woods, ricocheted off the rocks in the stream, climbed up the hillside. No one answered. They searched until nightfall. They searched the house, the surroundings, the dense woods beyond the bridge. Nothing. No bodies. No blood. No signs of struggle or violence. Only absence. When they returned to the village, it was already night. The wives, mothers, and neighbors waited at the chapel door. The priest was there. Everyone looked at the search party with eyes full of hope. Juan Custodio just shook his head. Benedita fell to her knees. But there was something the search party didn't mention that night. Something that Juan Custodio would only reveal years later in a private conversation with the priest, recorded in the priest's personal notebook. He said, "As we were leaving the farm, already almost dark, I looked back, and I saw a light. It wasn't a flashlight, it wasn't fire, it was a faint bluish light coming from inside the woods, from the same place where the footprints ended." The priest asked if he had gone back to investigate. Juan said no, that he was afraid, that they all were. I called the others, but when they looked, the light was gone, or maybe it never existed. I don't know. All I know is that I saw it. He paused for a long time. Then he added, "And I know they saw it too." But no one wanted to talk about it. That night, Benedita opened Sebastião's trunk of clothes. She was looking for something, a handkerchief, a shirt, anything that still had his scent on it. She found a piece of paper folded at the bottom. It was the letter, the incomplete letter we mentioned earlier, the last page. She couldn't read everything, she knew few letters, but she took it to the priest the next day. That's how the letter entered the official records. And that's how the question began to change. It was no longer, what happened to them? It was, what were they looking for? In the days following the disappearance, Santo Antonio do Salto was transformed. The usual silence of the village was replaced by a constant murmur, quiet conversations at doors, sidelong glances, theories whispered after mass. The official search continued for a week. The district police chief, a man named Aurelio Fonseca, arrived in the village 3 days after the disappearance. He brought with him 2 officers and a clerk. He questioned witnesses, examined the abandoned house, and walked the trail dozens of times. His final report, dated April 5, 1897, concluded frustratingly, "There is no evidence of a crime. There are no signs of a fatal accident. There are no bodies. The men disappeared without leaving any conclusive trace. The case remains open due to lack of evidence." But between the lines of the report, in marginal notes written in pencil, there are phrases that reveal the police chief's perplexity. How can 3 adult men, healthy and knowledgeable about the region, simply vanish? And further on, the scene suggests voluntary departure, but where to and why? Theories began to circulate. Some said that the 3 had run away, that they had hidden debts, women in other villages, problems that no one knew about. But this theory did not hold up. Sebastião owed nothing to anyone. Joaquim was a respected widower. Antonio had no possessions to abandon. Others suggested they had been attacked by wild animals, jaguars perhaps. But there was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no mangled bodies, no bones. Some hinted at murder, that someone had ambushed them on the road, killed them, hidden the bodies. But who? And why? They weren't carrying any money. They had no known enemies. And then a different theory emerged. Stranger, older. It came from a woman named Dona Jacinta, a midwife and healer, one of the oldest in the village. She was over 70 and knew stories that no one else remembered. One afternoon, sitting at the door of her house, she said to a group of women who were visiting her, "The old bridge farm has always been a place of passage." The women asked what she meant. Dona Jacinta looked at the horizon. "A long time ago, when I was a girl, I heard my grandfather talk about that place. He said it was a crossroads, not of roads, but of times, that there were nights when the world became thin, and that anyone who crossed at the wrong moment would not return the same." She paused, or would never return. The women fell silent. Someone asked if she believed it. Dona Jacinta shrugged. "I don't know. All I know is that no one lived there after old Luciano died. And he died alone. They say he was found sitting in his chair on the porch, looking at the bridge. No injuries, no illness, just still." The story spread. But the priest, indignant, publicly denied it. During Sunday Mass, he said, "I will not allow superstitions to tarnish the memory of good men. Sebastião, Joaquim, and Antonio were Christians. What happened to them is a tragedy, but it is not witchcraft. It is a human mystery, and God knows the truth." The village fell silent, but the unease remained. That's when the details emerged. Small, almost imperceptible, but disturbing. Benedita, rummaging through Sebastião's belongings, found a second folded piece of paper inside a prayer book. It wasn't a letter. It was a drawing. Crude, done in pencil. It showed a house, a bridge, a winding line that seemed to represent a stream. And next to the bridge, there was something marked with an X. Sebastião had never shown any interest in drawing. He was practical, direct. So why had he done that? Benedita took the drawing to the police chief. He attached it to the case file, but he didn't know how to interpret it. Antonio's mother, Dona Eulalia, began to have dreams. Every night she saw her son walking through the woods. He had his back to her. She shouted his name. He didn't turn around. He just kept walking deeper and deeper until he disappeared among the trees. She sought out the priest. She cried. She said she felt her son was alive. She didn't know where, but alive. The priest tried to comfort her, but deep down, he also had doubts. because there was one detail he didn't officially record, but wrote down in his personal notebook. 2 weeks after the disappearance, he went alone to Sítio da Ponte Velha. He wanted to pray at the site. He wanted to ask God for answers. He crossed the bridge. He walked to where the footprints ended. The pile of stones was still there. The stick was there too, but now it was dry, dead. And then he heard something. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't birds. It was a voice, distant, muffled, like someone calling from far away. He couldn't make out the words, just the tone. It was a male voice, and it seemed to be asking for help. The priest stood still. His heart was beating wildly. He shouted, "Sebastião, Joaquim, Antonio." Silence. He waited. Nothing. Then the voice returned, fainter, like a fading echo. The priest ran away. He crossed the bridge without looking back. He only stopped when he reached the main trail. He never returned to that place. But the most disturbing account came from Rosa, Joaquim's daughter. 3 months after his disappearance, she was playing near the river when she found something shining among the rocks. It was a small metal object. She picked it up. She wiped it on her clothes. It was a rosary, with dark wooden beads and a bronze crucifix. She recognized it immediately. It belonged to her father. Joaquim never left home without it. He always carried it in his pocket. He would touch it when he was thinking. But the river was on the opposite side of the village from the farm, miles away. How had the rosary ended up there? Rosa took the object to the police chief. He examined it. He confirmed that the initials engraved on the crucifix, J.R., corresponded to Joaquim Ribeiro. The police chief reopened the search. They combed the river. They dredged some sections. They looked for bodies. Nothing was found. Only the rosary, as if it had been left there on purpose, or returned. The last official record related to the case dates back to January 1898. Police Chief Aurelio Fonseca sent a letter to the district judge requesting that the case be closed permanently. He wrote, "Having exhausted all investigative possibilities, and after 10 months of fruitless searches, I consider it unlikely that the bodies will be found. I recommend that the families be allowed to hold symbolic funeral ceremonies so that they can begin to mourn." The request was accepted. In the spring of that year, the village held a collective mass for the 3 men. The wives dressed in mourning. The children cried. The chapel bell tolled 3 times. Sebastião Moreira da Cruz, Joaquim Ribeiro, and Antonio das Chagas were declared dead by absence. But no one really believed it, because deep in every heart there remained an unanswerable question. If they died, where are the bodies? And if they didn't die, where are they? Decades passed. Santo Antônio do Salto grew. The dirt road was widened. The chapel got a new bell. The wattle and daub houses gave way to brick buildings. The mill stopped. The village became a district. The district became a municipality. People grew old. Some died. Others were born without ever having known Sebastião, Joaquim, or Antonio. But the story did not die. It remained alive, in conversations around the fire, in whispered warnings to children, in restless glances toward the mountains as night fell. The old bridge farm was never reoccupied. The house collapsed completely in the 1910s. The bridge rotted and fell into the stream in 1920. Vegetation swallowed everything. Today, those who pass through the region hardly notice that there was once life there. But there is a trail, narrow, almost invisible, and sometimes older residents say they still find strange marks on the ground. Stacked stones, sticks stuck in the ground, as if someone or something were still trying to leave signs. Benedita never remarried. She raised her 2 children alone, sewing and washing clothes for other families. She kept Sebastião's workshop closed for years, exactly as he had left it. The tools hanging, the workbench clean, the smell of sawdust still present. When she died in 1932 at the age of 61, she was found holding a letter, the same incomplete letter she had discovered in her husband's trunk. Next to her, on the table, was a lit candle. Her children never knew what that letter said. She never talked about it, and when they tried to read it after her death, they found that the words were blurred. as if they had been wet with tears so many times that they had become illegible. Rosa, Joaquim's daughter, left the village at 17. She moved to the capital. She got married. She had children. She built a life far from the mountains, but she never threw away the rosary she had found in the river. She always carried it with her, and in her old age, in the 1960s, she wrote a letter to the local newspaper of her old village. The letter was never published, but it is preserved in the municipal archives. In it, Rosa wrote, "I know my father is not dead. I don't know how I know, but I know. Sometimes in the silence of the early morning I still hear the sound of his hammer striking the anvil, and then I wake up, and I realize that I am miles away, and he is decades away. But the sound continues, and I continue to listen." She ends the letter with one sentence. Maybe some people don't disappear. Maybe they just cross over to a place where we can't follow them. Donna Eulalia, Antonio's mother, lived until 1926. She spent the last years of her life practically blind, sitting in a rocking chair in front of her house, always looking toward the mountains. Neighbors said she talked to herself, or at least she seemed to be talking to someone. She called her son's name. She smiled. She laughed softly. Sometimes she cried. When she died, she was buried next to her husband, but on her tomb, as expressly requested in her will, there is no date of death for her son. Only his name, Antonio das Chagas, beloved son, always awaited. The priest who recorded the events, Father Eugenio, left the village in 1902. He was transferred to another parish. He took with him his personal notebook in which he had written everything down: conversations, testimonies, doubts. Before leaving, he celebrated one last mass, and at the end, he said something that remained engraved in the memory of those who were present. There are mysteries that God allows us to witness, but not to understand. And there are mysteries that are not meant to be solved, but to remind us of our smallness in the face of the unknown. Father Eugenio's notebook was found in 1978 among the belongings of a grandniece who had already passed away. It was donated to the diocesan archive. That is where the most detailed quotes in this story come from. In 1953, a group of young people from the village decided to camp near the site of the old farm. It was summer. They wanted to prove that there was nothing strange there, that it was all just ancient history. They set up tents. They made a bonfire. They sang. They drank. They laughed at the legends. But in the middle of the night, they all woke up at the same time. There were no screams. There was no panic. Just a sudden and absolute silence, as if the world had stopped breathing. One of the boys, named Carlos, described the feeling years later. It was as if something was watching us. Not something hostile, just present and immense. So big that it wouldn't fit inside the forest, not even inside the mountain. It was as if the night itself had eyes. They took down their tents before dawn and returned to the village. None of them ever spoke openly about what they felt. But they also never returned to that place. Today, more than a century later, Santo Antônio do Salto is an ordinary town. It has paved streets, internet, television. People work, study, live their lives. The story of the three men who disappeared in 1897 is known only to the elderly, and even then only in fragments. But there is one curious detail. In the town's central square near the old chapel, now renovated and expanded, there is a bronze plaque. It was placed there in 1997, exactly 100 years after their disappearance. The plaque reads, "In memory of Sebastião Moreira da Cruz, Joaquim Ribeiro, and Antonio das Chagas, men of faith and work who left in 1897 and never returned. May their souls find peace." Just below, there is a sentence in smaller letters. They had time to return, but they chose to continue. No one knows who wrote that last sentence. It was not in the original design of the plaque. It simply appeared. Police Chief Aurelio Fonseca, now retired and elderly, gave an interview to a regional newspaper in 1931. It was the last time he spoke publicly about the case. The reporter asked if he believed the three men were still alive. The police chief smiled. He said, "No, I think they died, but I don't know if they died in March 1997. Maybe they died years later, or decades, or maybe at some time I can't name. The reporter didn't understand. He asked him to explain. The chief shook his head. There are things in this world that don't fit in reports. There are places where time doesn't work as it should, and there are choices we make without knowing why. Those 3 men made a choice, and they lived, or died, with the consequences. He added, almost whispering, I just wanted to know what they found on the other side. The last recorded word on the case comes from a court file, a document filed in 1962 when a great-grandson of Sebastião requested access to the original case files. Attached to the request is a handwritten letter. The great-grandson explains that he grew up hearing the story, that he always wanted to understand, that he read everything, and that he finally visited the site. He writes, I didn't find any answers, but I found something strange. In the middle of the woods where they say the bridge used to be, there is a huge tree, old, probably 100 years old, and on its trunk about 2 meters above the ground, there are 3 initials carved into the wood. S.M.C. Sebastião Moreira de Cruz. The wood has healed around the letters. They are old, very old. They may have been carved decades ago, or they may have been carved that night. He concludes, I don't know what it means. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But I know that while I was there, alone, in silence, I had the impression that someone was right behind me. And when I turned around, there was no one there. Just wind, just leaves, just the distant sound of running water. There are stories that don't end. They just dissolve in time, like fog. Sebastião, Joaquim, and Antonio disappeared in March 1897. They were never found. They were never explained. But somehow, they live on, in the records, in the memories, in the questions we still can't answer. And perhaps that is the only truth that remains. Some people don't disappear because they were taken. They disappear because they chose to cross over. And on the other side, no one knows what awaited them.